limited strike or a wider war? We asked the man who shaped US strategy under Donald Trump. In on point two, fuel panic hits the streets after a private player breaks rank with a sharp price hike. Even as the government companies hold the line, can India shield consumers from a global oil shock triggered by the West Asia war? In on point three, IRGC Navy Chief and the man behind the Hormuz blockade strategy, Ali Raza Tangseri, killed amid ceasefire. Is America serious about peace in West Asia? As the conflict in West Asia intensifies and the risk of wider confrontation grows, the big question is how far this escalation can go and what options remain on the table for Washington. With military posturing increasing around Kharg Island and tension centered on the Strait of Hormuz, the stakes could not be higher. At a moment like this, insight from someone who has been at the very heart of the US strategic decision making becomes crucial. Joining us live is John Bolton, who served as National Security Advisor during Donald Trump's first term and has long been one of the most outspoken voices on Iran and United States foreign policy. Mr. Bolton, I appreciate you speaking with us, and let me begin by asking you, sir, why is Trump blowing hot and cold on the Iran war?
Well, it's a question that's very hard to answer. It looked at the beginning as though he was committed to regime change in Iran, which I think is the right policy. I would like to see that succeed. But he likes to see things happen very quickly, which is not possible if your objective is regime change. You need patience and you need persistence. I think on the military side of things, by and large, they're effectively destroying much of Iran's institutions of state power that threaten their neighbors and threaten the people of Iran, but we haven't done enough yet to help the internal opposition. And I think if the leaders in Tehran get the impression that we're getting impatient, it will simply reinforce their approach of just waiting us out.
A lot of critics say that the political objectives of the war remain unclear. First it was about the fissile material, then it became about the ballistic missile, and now the regime change.
Well, certainly the two main threats perceived before were the nuclear weapons and ballistic missile program and the threat of terrorism. It's been my view for some time that the only way to eliminate those threats is to change the regime, because the desire to get nuclear weapons and to use terrorist means against neighbors and adversaries around the world is built into the regime. So regime change is basically what Trump said at the beginning and back in January when the Ayatollahs were massacring their fellow citizens. Trump said to the demonstrators, keep protesting, take control of your institutions, help is on its way. And he said that the day he announced the strikes, that this was an opportunity for the people of Iran at long last to take control of their government. That's the right approach, but you need to stick to it. You can't be diverted. Now, the threat of closing the Strait of Hormuz was always present, and that is one area of the military activity I'm kind of puzzled about, why we weren't doing more about that earlier in the war and preventing it from happening. But, you know, the Gulf Arab states now are taking even a harder line against Iran because they see that this regime is perfectly prepared to close the strait and hurt everybody. And they don't want to live with that, and I don't blame them, and I don't think customers of theirs around the world should blame them for now saying, basically, we share the objective of regime change.
So what's your assessment? Because the Marines are being deployed, forces from the immediate response forces are being deployed. Is America preparing for a ground invasion or a limited strike or boots on ground?
I don't think we can tell from the outside. Certainly those possibilities, those contingencies are what these deployments could give us. It could simply be to try and threaten the regime in Tehran. But, you know, the saying goes, never make a threat you're not prepared to carry out. And with Trump, sometimes you don't know that he understands that.
So was Iranian response underestimated? You know, the asymmetric response, more than 1,835 drones were fired at UAE alone, more than 300 ballistic missiles were fired at Abu Dhabi. So wasn't this taken into account that Iran can respond against energy installation, data centers, desalination plants, something which is very crucial to the life in the West Asia?
Well, I think it was well understood, and I can't believe that the U.S. military didn't brief Trump on it. Why he didn't take it into account, I can't say. But I do think it's important, even though there have been a lot of attacks, to understand the ratio of what we're doing to Iran compared to what Iran is doing to others. And I have this from an Israeli source, a former high-ranking military officer. It's 10 days old now, but I think it's still true today. He said if you calculate the tonnage of weapons the U.S. and Israel have dropped on Iran compared to what Iran has dropped on everybody else, that ratio is 300 to 1. 300 to 1. Even if it's only 200 to 1, that's a fantastic difference. So what they're doing, especially in recent days, is their missile launchers have been destroyed and other capabilities removed. It's always dangerous. There's no doubt about it. But it amounts more to harassment than anything else. The big problem that they've created now is the closure of the Strait.
So how can the Strait be open? America has eliminated the commander of the Iranian naval forces. Ali Raza has been assassinated. 24 hours ago, there was a plan which has been sent either via Turkey or Pakistan to Iranians, which is a 15-point program. So on one hand, America is talking about ceasefire. On the other, the guy responsible for the Hormuz has been eliminated. Do you think that in this context, any pause can happen? De-escalation can happen, sir?
Yeah, I don't see any possibility of a deal in the very near term between the Ayatollahs and the United States, whether there's a meeting in Pakistan tomorrow or over the weekend. If you look at the 15 points that the administration apparently passed through intermediaries to Iran and compare it with the Iranian 5-point response, they're on two different planets. I think our military is working hard to create the conditions where the Strait of Hormuz can be reopened. I'm told that they believe they're proceeding quickly. It's very important that we accomplish that because we want to restore confidence to world petroleum markets that this is not going to be an extended closure, and that'll help calm things, bring prices down.
So what's your assessment? Trump's focus primarily in his second term was China, and suddenly he entered the West Asian theater. Why did this happen?
Well, I think reality perhaps intruded on his desires because the threat posed by Iran, which after all, in this context in the Middle East, acts as a surrogate for the China-Russia axis, that this became a threat to critical interest to Israel, to the Gulf Arab states, which it has been, and to the United States itself. I wish we had done this years ago. It would have been easier, hopefully, and more expeditious. But the regime in Tehran right now is at its most unpopular point since it took power in 1979, at its weakest. This is the right moment to try and take it down. I just hope we follow through on it.
Let me ask you, do you think that the strikes have united the people of Iran for the regime which is oppressive, obviously, or you think that there is a section which can rise up against IRGC and besiege?
Well, I think the vast majority of the people in Iran are opposed to the regime. And I think they see that by the nature of these strikes, the regime can't defend itself. And the conclusion anybody draws from that is if a regime can't defend itself, it can't remain in power very long. So it shows how weak the regime is. And the objective now should be to create strife inside the regime, to pit one faction against another, to see the regime come apart at the top, to have defectors, leaders of the regime, especially in the regular conventional military, not the Revolutionary Guard, who say this ship is going down and I don't want to go down with it. These are the circumstances that lead to regime change. It's why we need to give more help to the opposition, which is very widespread but not well organized.
Then how do you do that? Because if you recall, sir, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said that, revolutions will not only happen from the air power. We require something on the ground. So the regime has to change. There have to be people on the ground, or the regime will not change.
Well, I think that's right. The question is when the people, the unarmed civilians, come out into the streets again. They're obviously intimidated, having seen over 30,000 of their friends and family brutally murdered by the regime back in January. So that's why now really what the focus should be is weakening the regime inside, finding people who, not necessarily as a matter of high principle, but really self-preservation, are willing to say, I'm going to break with this regime. It's no longer acceptable. This is a way I think a regime like that collapses.
From the foreign policy perspective of Washington, this is for the first time that the NATO countries, Europe, even the allies and the friends of America have kept a distance with Washington on this war. What's your larger assessment? Has this helped American foreign policy, American interests?
Well, I think the administration should have done a better job briefing the allies, and not just NATO, really all across the world. You don't have to say exactly what we were prepared to do, but you have to make the case for regime change and why it's in other countries' interest. I think the White House also made a mistake in not preparing the American people enough. It's not, it can be corrected, but it's late in the game to do it. I think this war is very important to the Europeans, just as it is in South and East Asia, where much of the Gulf's oil goes, because the world market in oil affects everybody. I think the Europeans are beginning to move in the right direction, but as I say, we should have spent more time bringing them on side before the hostilities started.
So, in your opinion, when will you think that Iran will be ready for talks? Because now it's a sort of a federated system, 31 people, taking care of 31 commands in absence of a central leadership which emanates from Tehran, no central authority. So, when do you think that bend will happen? When do you think that they will cross that Rubicon and say, well, yes, I think we need to speak to Washington?
Well, I think it could happen at any time, but I would not be talking with people who are still essentially principal figures in the regime itself. They are not going to negotiate their own surrender. That's just not going to happen. And I do think the fragmentation of authority among the 31 provinces is a further sign that the regime is weakened. And in areas where ethnic groups like the Kurds are majority populations, I think it leaves the regime very vulnerable there. The Kurds, the Azeris, the Baluchis, I mean, these are ethnic groups with strong grievances against the regime. And if they were empowered to put more pressure on the regime, including through military assistance, I think that would be helpful.
So a lot of people may agree with the American foreign policy objectives in Iran, but there is a lot of debate on assassinating leadership of a sovereign nation. What happens to the rule-based order? Not one layer, not second layer, not third layer, but entire hierarchies being taken care of.
Well, they're all in the chain of command, right up to the supreme leader, who we would designate, for example, our president as the national command authority. That's what the supreme leader was. So they're legitimate targets in war to destroy the enemy's command and control capabilities.
Absolutely. And before, sir, I let go of you, do you think that this war can continue like Afghanistan, Iraq, or other theaters where they stretched, or this will see a possibility of an end soon, because the energy markets are shaking all across the world?
Well, I think we'd certainly like to see it end. I wouldn't put a target on it, because if we said, as Trump has said, for example, I want it to end by the time of the summit with Xi Jinping, that just says to the remnants of the regime, if we only hold on for another 6 weeks, we'll win. I think they should know that we are patient enough to see this through. And I think that also signals to other people inside Iran that we're not going to withdraw and leave them in the lurch if they make efforts at regime change internally.
Thank you. Thank you so much, sir, for joining me for this conversation on News9. So, John Bolton, the former National Security Advisor to Donald Trump in his first term, feels that regime change is possible, but there are a lot of naysayers who feel that the regime change is impossible. In fact, people are now in support of the people in power in Iran rather than against it, as was the case 3 months ago. So this was on point 1, but don't go away because it's time for a short break. In on point 2, we will talk about the fuel panic that has hit the streets after a private player breaks ranks with a sharp price hike, even as the government companies hold the line, and the government says, don't create panic. India has enough